who are involved on the ground, because those are my roots. That's where I come from. That's what I believe in. That's what the foundation is about.
The Obama Foundation Leaders Program is a 6-month non-residential leadership development journey that our participants undertake in order to augment their leadership skills and also build a supportive community with other change makers from across the globe.
Be the core mission of the Center and our Foundation program, inspiring and empowering citizens and communities to act on the biggest challenges of our time and preparing young people everywhere to pick up the baton and help change the world. You know, over the last couple of months, we've seen what it looks like when a society loses the ability to distinguish truth from fiction. On the other hand, the last couple of months have also shown what can happen when the world pushes back. We have seen it in the people, including some of our Obama leaders in Europe, who are organizing on social media to help Ukrainian refugees, offering food and shelter and jobs and rides. We have a choice right now. Do we allow our democracy to wither, or do we make it better? That's the choice we face, and it is a choice worth embracing.
One of my favorite childhood memories is of my Danish mother teaching a vibrant group of Somali, Iraqi, and Turkish women gymnastics. During our early years, my brother and I grew up with a single mom in an impoverished small community very close to Gellerup here in Denmark. And under the guise of only teaching gymnastics and in a room filled with laughter, she spoke with the women about sexual and reproductive rights, about domestic violence and what it means to live in a democracy. Back then, I would have never imagined that I, building on my mother's work, would dedicate my life to connecting people with critical information. I work as an entrepreneur at the intersection of education and technology, with more than 120 NGOs. Our brave partners work in the sphere of sexual and reproductive rights, democracy, and the Sustainable Development Goals. And they connect young people with trusted information and learning experiences about these issues and others. Spaces like these have become critical in addressing some of the collective failures of our generation and those before us. I stand before you today and appeal to you with a sense of urgency. While the increasing use of smartphones and social media first came with the whisper of renewed democratic participation, fake news and misinformation dominate the digital landscape and result in an erosion of the fabric of truth and polarization. The young people on our platform are concerned about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They're concerned about our lacking advancement on climate change. We expect technology giants to enter a new era where digital ethics and transparency are a baseline, not an extravagance. There is much to be solved still, but my sense of hope remains intact. Throughout my experience as an Obama Foundation leader, President Obama and my peers have taught me that it's okay for a young woman to have big dreams and to articulate those dreams with a sense of pride. They have shown me that the pursuit of big dreams is challenging, but We are the change we've been waiting for. It takes true courage, even for a president, to have your legacy built not only by your own actions, but by the actions of others leading through your example. What shall be our collective legacy as we leave Copenhagen? Whom better to facilitate the exploration of the most pressing issues of our time and how we may solve them than President Obama? Please join me in welcoming him here on stage in Copenhagen.
Well, thank you, Sarah Josephine, for that introduction and the extraordinary work that you are doing. And I want to thank my old friend, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, for hosting me and our extraordinary Obama Foundation leaders here today. It is wonderful to see all of you. And I am confident that there have been extraordinary discussions that have been taking place since this conference began. As we meet, Ukraine obviously weighs heavily on our hearts and our minds. We've all witnessed the terrible suffering in a war that recalls Europe's darkest history. But we have also witnessed the Ukrainian people's heroic resistance to Russian aggression. They've united to defend not just their sovereignty, but their democratic identity. And their actions have rallied much of the world behind the values of self-determination and human dignity. It's inspiring. And because of this courage and because of this solidarity on display, Vladimir Putin is failing to achieve his aims inside of Ukraine and beyond. NATO has stepped up and has grown stronger. Finland and Sweden are seeking swift accession. Countries have welcomed displaced Ukrainians with open arms. Meanwhile, Russia is cut off from resources and revenue, and many of its best and brightest have left. A blow to its present, but also to its future. So we should take heart from Ukrainian resolve and from renewed transatlantic solidarity. And I know that's been discussed at this conference. These are signs of hope in the midst of despair. But make no mistake, this war is far from over. The costs will continue to mount. The course of events, as Anders and I discussed before we came out, are hard to predict. And our support for Ukraine must remain strong, steadfast, and sustained until this conflict reaches a resolution. Now, while Ukraine properly commands our immediate attention, it's also important to recognize that Putin's lawlessness is not happening in isolation, as I'm sure previous speakers have noted. On every continent, we are seeing democratic backsliding. On every continent, emboldened autocrats are ramping up repression, they're targeting minority groups, they're often flouting international law. Just as disturbing, within democracies, populist appeals grounded in fear and bigotry and resentment have elevated leaders who, once they're in office, have sought to systematically undermine democratic institutions and entrench themselves in power. In my own country, the forces that unleashed mob violence on our capital are still churning out misinformation and conspiracy theories. For those of us who fervently believe in the ideals of democracy, the question is, how do we respond? And if nothing else, recent events should shake us out of complacency. Now, there was a trend after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the sense that history was inevitably going to usher in a democratic world. Well, we've been reminded that democratic practice, democracy, is neither inevitable nor self-executing. Most of recorded human history is a chronicle of violence and ignorance and conflict, of strong nations subjugating weak nations, of groups using tribe or race or gender or religion or some other difference to justify dominion over others, to grab land and territory and resources, sometimes to do it just because they can. Democracy, by contrast, has, for most of human history, been an anomaly. In a relatively small sliver of time, in fits and starts, through revolution, struggle, and sacrifice, democracy took hold in a few places, and then began, in fits and starts, to spread elsewhere in the globe. That expansion has helped contain some of humanity's baser instincts, but those instincts, those impulses, were never eliminated, nor were the old structures of privilege and exploitation that they produced. So, the point is, if we want democracy to flourish, we will have to fight for it. We will have to nurture it. We will have to demonstrate its value again and again in improving the lives of ordinary people. And we will also have to be willing to look squarely at the shortcomings of our own democracies. Not the ideal, but the reality of our own democracies. Only then will we be able to develop a better story of what democracy can be and must be in this rapidly changing world. Now, for some of us, certainly those attending this conference, particularly those of you with gray hair like me, the virtues of democracy may seem obvious. For those generations scarred by successive world wars, it was clear where dictatorship and master race theories and religious intolerance and rampant nationalism could lead, because we'd seen it here in Europe and elsewhere in the world. Bombed out cities and broken lives. As many as 60 million dead worldwide during World War II. Auschwitz, Stalin's gulags. For the Allies who emerged victorious, the goal was to prevent a repeat of such tragic history. So they built institutions to check unbridled power and to protect civil society and to foster pluralism. And they realized, well, if we're going to fight this battle, maybe we have to fix some of the things in our own democracies and make them more representative. Make our hypocrisy, the gap between our words and our deeds, less obvious. Internationally, they erected a multilateral system to reinforce international norms and recognize universal rights and encourage the peaceful resolution of disputes. And as imperfect as these institutions were, most people during this period understood, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, that democracy beat the alternatives. 2 cheers for democracy. The notion was that democracy might not prevent every foolish war, but it made them less likely. Democracy might not end poverty and racism, but it could make things better. And in fact, progress was real. But it was also incomplete. That was a long time ago. I'm now 60, and it happened before I was around. Most of the people alive on the earth today don't have that as a reference point. Today, abstract appeals about democracy won't persuade the jobless youth on the outskirts of Paris, may not persuade families in northern England struggling to pay the bills, or the displaced workers in the former factory towns of the American Midwest. And they barely register with the hundreds of millions of people trapped in poverty around the world. You know, a few weeks ago, I met with some young leaders who had just completed one of our Obama Foundation programs. We were in New York City. One of the participants was a remarkable young African who had built an organization that expands educational opportunities for underserved youth. And he asked me a question. He says, President Obama, how do I answer my peers who argue that democracy in our country has failed to deliver? Everywhere we see corruption, poverty, a lack of progress despite election after election. When my peers look at China, he said, they see a model of orderly advancement and material improvement in people's lives. So even if it means restrictions on some freedoms, isn't it worth the trade-offs? And instinctively, I pointed out that the same system in China that his friends were praising now had let millions die of starvation and produced the chaos of the Cultural Revolution. I told the young man he was too young to remember what life was like in his own country before democracy came, how there had been a brutal civil war that resulted in the death of millions, chronic corruption, and strife under subsequent military regimes. So I told him, you need to broaden your lens, and he listened politely. What was he going to do? Maybe he was even convinced by my arguments, but you could tell he didn't think his peers would be, at least not until those arguments were accompanied by measurable changes in their lives, where they live, in the here and now, not by reference to what happened 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. And I'm convinced some version of this conversation is taking place right now in every country on every continent. I'm also convinced that for us to win what is a contest of ideas between those of us who believe in democracy and those who are convinced that older ways of doing business are better. In that contest of ideas, it won't be enough to just say what we are against. We have to describe clearly what we are for. It won't be enough to reaffirm a creaky status quo, to just put a new coat of paint on the existing order. Because the fact is that order has been shaken at its foundations by globalization and financial crisis and social media, by rising inequality and mass migration and climate change and a multipolar world. If we are going to fortify democracy, if democracy is going to thrive and not just survive in a few pockets on the map, we are going to have to rebuild our democracies and their institutions so they work better for more people, for this new age. Now, I am not here to offer a 10-point plan. I'm no longer running for office. Also, I don't have all the answers. And mainly, I'm not here to offer a 10-point plan because I want you to hear from some of the young leaders that we work with. This is their friends and support group. I thought we were going to drink later. Did you guys get an early start? What I do want to do, though, before I bring these leaders out, is I want to just spend a few minutes sketching in very broad strokes some of the work that I believe lies ahead. And to begin with, we need to be clear that democracy is about more than elections. Most of us understand this, but I think we really have to continually focus in on this. Because we have seen time and again how the machinery of elections can be twisted to serve the interests of despots. I believe a genuine democracy must be rooted in the core principle that all persons, regardless of their race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, physical capacity, economic status, all persons have an inviolable dignity and worth, and that they are entitled to a say in how they are governed and deserve equal treatment in the eyes of the law. That, to me, is a core principle of democracy. There was a time, and the reason it's important for us to say this is because there was a time, a long time, when countries could claim to be model democracies, despite the fact that they maintained effective caste systems. Racial caste systems, religious caste systems, gender caste systems, treated people differently but said, oh, we're model democracies. No more. No democracy is perfect. And injustice is embedded in every society. We can acknowledge that. But any system of government that wants to call itself a democracy while codifying injustice violates the very essence of the word. So that's a core principle at the center of the democratic project. And this core principle has to be operationalized. Yes, through free and fair elections, but also through institutions that guarantee basic rights, like the freedom of speech and assembly and the ability to practice one's faith. It needs institutions that ensure the equal administration of justice and promote transparency and establish a process to resolve differences and transfer power peacefully. That's what we mean by true democracy, a system in which we, the people, includes all and not just some citizens. Now, within that, the particulars of any nation's constitution, political process, administrative machinery may vary based on custom or tradition, but I believe that the pursuit of the deeper value must be our North Star. By those standards, some democracies are doing better than others. Collectively, we're all falling short. To build stronger democracies and beat back this trend towards authoritarianism, we will all need to raise our game. And I'd suggest we focus on 4 broad areas. Number 1, for democracy to flourish, we need to develop models for a more inclusive and sustainable capitalism. I believe in market economies, not just because they're more efficient and more innovative than other systems so far devised, but because when properly structured, they are compatible with freedom. Scandinavian countries, including Denmark, demonstrate that. But I also believe that the version of capitalism that has come to dominate the global economy has also come to corrode democracy. When you have trillions of dollars move around the globe in the blink of an eye, outside of the control of any sovereign country, far-flung mega companies operating beyond the reach of national regulation or oversight or tax collection, without regard for their impact on local communities or workers and unconstrained by any values other than their quarterly shareholder report. That's a lot of power outside of democracy. And we have to acknowledge, economically, this globalization has made products cheaper. It has increased interdependence. It has helped drive rapid development in some countries, most notably China. But it has also driven income inequality to levels not seen in generations. In wealthy countries, it's amplified the loss of bargaining power for workers. It's stunted wage growth. It's reduced the status of many workers. Maybe for all but a narrow band of people in the knowledge professions. For some poorer countries, the shift towards automation, the relentless foreign competition, has actually made it harder to develop viable local industry and expand a fledgling middle class. And there's been a constant brain drain of educated and skilled workers. And while China has emerged as a big winner in the globalization sweepstakes, using export-driven strategies to lift a huge swath of its population out of poverty, it's come at the price of increased, steady repression and control of its people, and a more aggressive nationalism on the world stage, especially as growth slows and the Chinese government may find it harder to meet people's rising expectations. These aren't conditions where democracy is likely to thrive. When people feel economically insecure, when they feel that the game is rigged, anger mounts, resentment builds. When democratic governments can't respond to these frustrations, partly because they don't have control over either the tax revenues or the regulatory capacity to deal with the major players in the economy, people grow cynical towards their leaders and the political system that produced them. When the gap between rich and poor widens further and further, then fellow citizens share fewer experiences. The rich people are behind a gate somewhere and the poor people are outside, and their kids aren't going to school together and they're not feeling invested in each other. Well, people feel fewer obligations, and social trust declines. And in the absence of solidarity, people are more likely to turn to populist appeals from strongmen who offer somebody to blame, whether it's immigrants or minorities or foreign powers or shadowy elites or opposition parties or even democracy itself. So if we want to strengthen our democracies, we have to pay attention to economics. And we need to make the global economy more responsive to workers, families, communities, and representative governments. And some of this work on labor protections or corporate governance, on tax policies that reduce inequality or encourage investment where it's needed, some of that will happen at a local or national level. Other strategies like ending global tax avoidance and combating kleptocracy requires international cooperation. But our objective should be clear: reducing the wealth gap, expanding middle classes, restoring people's sense of control over their own livelihoods, making private companies more accountable. We want them to make a profit, but also more accountable for the common good. That's number one. Number two, we need to revitalize our political institutions so that people believe that participation is actually worth the effort. In too many democracies, politics feels like a distant and increasingly irrelevant enterprise. Some of that is by design, by the way. In my own country, for example, we have what's called a filibuster rule in the United States Senate that has effectively made it almost impossible for either party, even when they have a majority, to get anything substantially through the Senate and passed and signed into law. At a certain point, people start wondering, why bother? You have governments that either make it too hard to vote, a lot of governments who make it difficult to see why your vote matters. The powerful seem to have more access. They act with impunity. Over time, the bonds between the people and their elected representatives break down. So every democracy has to take basic steps to restore confidence that democracy is working the way it's supposed to, like protecting the right to vote, ensuring that vote is counted equally and transparently, holding the powerful to account when they bend the rules or break the law, ending the scourge of dark money that so often corrupts our politics. More than that, democracies need to redesign governments so that they can deliver better results. And in some cases, that means stripping away bureaucracy and red tape, even when it's well-intentioned, which makes governments unable to move on major initiatives. In the United States right now, building infrastructure, like mass transit or a road project or an airport, it costs like 2-3 times more than it does here in Europe. And in some cases, it means pushing more decision-making to the local and regional level, so we can road test new ideas to solve problems and build bridges between those in power and the people that they're supposed to represent. An issue here in Europe that has to be paid attention to. The bottom line is that people care about democratic process, but they also want to see results. Third, we need to spend more time and energy building a democratic culture. Those of us who promote democracy, we're often progressive, we focus a lot on policy. We see politics and governance as a pluralistic negotiation between competing, rational, self-interested actors. That's not what moves people in the world. Emotions matter. Stories matter. People care about meaning and purpose and belonging and status. And in this age of uncertainty and polarization, we've seen the loss of many of the stabilizing foundations in people's lives, whether it's neighborhoods that are disrupted or religious, cultural, civic organizations that are atrophying. And often it's authoritarian leaders who understand this, and those who believe in democracy struggle to catch up. We avoid what, in the United States at least, we call culture wars, because we want to focus on tax policy. But those emotions are powerful, and they're legitimate. Purpose, meaning, connection, those things do matter. Now, I want to be clear. I have little sympathy for reactionaries who cynically condemn identity politics or cancel culture, when really all they're doing is trying to preserve existing privilege or excuse entrenched injustice or bigotry. I mean, the original identity politics is racism and sexism and homophobia. That's nothing if not identity politics, and it's done a lot more harm than some tweet from an aggrieved liberal. But what is also true is that if we are going to strengthen democracy, if we want to encourage pluralism and civility and self-governance, we have to embrace and restore a language of mutual respect that speaks to people's need for belonging, that they care about the traditions they come from. They care about the places they come from. They want to feel proud about who they are. And that's easier to do in homogeneous countries. It's harder to do as countries become more diverse. So my point is, a big part of strengthening democracy is not just about politics and policy, it is about culture. And we have to embrace that. We have to expand the civic education we provide our children and give them practice to live in a democracy. We have to create organizations that give them experience in working with people who are different and exercise their civic muscles. We need to create platforms that encourage a willingness that nudge people and incentivize people to extend good faith to those who are not like themselves or don't think like themselves. A politics that is inclusive rather than exclusive. This is both ethically sound and a practical necessity, something that leaders like Gandhi and King and Mandela understood. There's a reason why Nelson Mandela really focused on South African rugby when he was released. He was sending a signal to those who had imprisoned him for 27 years that I am not here to take away your traditions and your identity as long as you make sure they're compatible with my dignity and respect for my people. We need to find ways to build that kind of solidarity and forge connections with people so that they don't push us away. That doesn't mean that we have to indulge traditions that don't live up to our core principles of equality and human dignity. But it does mean we need to use language that affirms the best of existing national and religious and cultural and ethnic traditions, rather than make arguments that make people feel as if they have to abandon all aspects of their past. We can reckon with our darker history without asking people to reject their own identities. Indeed, progress is about doing the work of perfecting our unions, not repudiating the possibility of unity. Finally, as we do all these things, we have to take steps to detoxify our discourse, particularly the scourge of disinformation and conspiracy theories and hate online that has polluted our political discourse. Now, I spoke at length about this at Stanford University in the spring. I'll just reinforce a few key points. Technology companies have to accept a degree of democratic oversight and accountability. Profit can't be the only driver for platforms who've acquired power that was once reserved for nation states. And while no human endeavor can eliminate human fallibility, we can actually make these things better. These technologies and platforms were made by human beings. Human beings can make them work better. And I look forward to doing more work in the months to come to lift up and put forward new ideas around technology and the other areas that I just mentioned. Because these are the areas where we all have to do better. It's going to determine the fate of our democracies, whether they stick, whether they get stronger or whether they continue to get weaker. But although I'm ready to volunteer and sign up and work with existing groups and organizations that are focused in these areas, I want to underscore I'm probably not going to be the main driver of solutions at this stage, nor are many of us in this room who've already, I won't say are past our primes, but have gone through, run through positions of power. Because we need to build democracy for the future, not the past. And what gives me hope is the promise and potential of the next generation of leaders who are coming up. Young people who understand that the future of democracy, and in fact the very planet that we live on, hangs in the balance. These young people are ready to do the work, and many of them are already deeply engaged in the project of rebuilding our democracies. That's who Michelle and I are supporting at our foundation, and that is why I'm so glad to be joined by just a small sampling of our extraordinary Obama Foundation leaders from all across Europe who gathered here today. If you can all please welcome Tudor, Federica, and Selma. Come on up. First of all, you can tell what outstanding young leaders they are because they already know you want to bring your own fans to events. Before we start our conversation, I would love for each of you very briefly to describe for the audience who you are, what you've been doing, and why you know, it's been so exciting for you to gather with some of the other leaders and peers from across Europe. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much, Mr. President, for having us here, and thanks to all the Obama leaders out there, because it's really nice to get in an audience with you guys. My name is Federica Vinci. I am the Deputy Mayor of Isernia, which is a small town in the south of Italy. The work that I do is basically to try to bring back politics, grassroots politics in very small town in my region and hopefully in the future in my country. The best part of being here with all these amazing leaders has been having the chance to reconnect with people that do our same job, even if in different fields. Sometimes it feels lonely when you are on the ground trying to make change, but reconnecting with all of you has been such a gift because it reminds us why we're here and what our purpose is. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Tudor.
Thank you very much. I'm Tudor, I'm from Romania. I am the executive director of what we call an online digital campaigning organization. We work on multi-issues, ranging from the environment to the rule of law. We have an online community with 1.2 million members. This is the people that receive constantly our updates and are invited to take action whenever is needed. We put pressure on decision makers each time there is a good opportunity. We fundraise from our members, and this is how we manage to actually win campaigns. Sometimes we fundraise for expensive lawsuits. Sometimes we fundraise for ads in newspapers to get our message across. And I chose this work because it's my way of defending democracy, and it's my way to help people, simple people from all walks of life, to have a saying in today's democracy, basically.
Excellent. Selva.
Thank you so much. My name is Selva Mustafi. I'm coming from North Macedonia, and I'm a national grassroots organizer within the biggest Roma national movement in Macedonia named Avaya, which means we are coming. I've been active for 10 years now, from the age of 16, and our movement's purpose is to build power in the communities and articulate Roma's issues on higher national level. And another thing is now that from our movement, we also built another 7 national movements in 7 different countries. And I serve as trainer, trying to build the communities, build the structures, and build power.
Fantastic. All right. So we only have about 40 minutes. I want to start with an open-ended question. Because in my opening remarks, I said that, certainly for my grandparents, my parents, and to some degree for me, when I think about democracy and the tension between democracy and authoritarianism, my reference point is the Cold War. I think about, I was in law school when the Berlin Wall came down. I trying to do the math as to whether you were born when the Berlin Wall came down. I don't think so, right? And so I'm interested, when we're here at this Democratic Summit, how do you and your peers think about this issue of democracy in your own countries, here in Europe, worldwide? Is it, do you have a sense of concern and worry that democracy is declining? Do you feel cynical about how existing democracies operate? And obviously, it's hard to generalize for everybody your age, but you're also having a lot of conversations with people who are active and care about issues. So, Frederica, you want to start?
Yeah, so being the deputy mayor of a small town, it means that I get to have a lot of meetings with people of my age, but also younger. So 15 years old, 16, 18 years old, boys and girls. And I remember right after that I was elected and then nominated deputy mayor, I'm also in charge of youth policies. So coming from a community organizing background, I decided to call all the representatives of the different high schools of my hometown. Right. we sat around the table and I asked them, so guys, tell me, how have you worked with politicians in the past? What have you guys done together, or what has been done for you? And well, before asking this question, the first thing that they said to me was, have we done anything wrong? So,
Why are you calling me in here?
Why
Am I in
are you calling
trouble?
us here? Are we in trouble?
Yeah.
And this made me realize that these guys had never been, and these girls had never been listened to before. So when we were talking about politics, they were completely disillusioned. Not because, and I thought because they didn't have any luck for the future, or they didn't have any thought about their jobs, but actually they were not even thinking about their future. They had never been listened to. They've never been involved in policy making. Politicians were doing policies without involving them at all. So they were like, we don't see politicians, we don't hear from them, we just see them when they want our votes. And I think that if we want, of course we want democracy, right? We want our rights to be protected, we want our freedom, and I don't think that anybody would exchange democracy for anything in the world. Yet we have to admit that democracy, at least in places like mine, is failing generations like my generation or generations even younger. So we, as politicians, as leaders, have a huge responsibility to go back into these places and make these boys, this girl, part of the solution, part of this policy-making process, listen to them and engage them, because we are talking about huge numbers. Like Italy has around 8,000 municipalities. 180 municipalities are above 50,000 people. All the rest, more than 7,800 municipalities, are really small towns where politicians can have a day-to-day engagement with their constituencies and with those kids. I think it's our job to do it, because this is the only way we can infuse hope in them and in the future of democracy.
As I listen, I'm going to think of new questions. I'll give you a new question, Tudor, but you can answer the old question. Take it where you want. But as I was listening to Federica speaking, she mentioned online, and one thing we know about young people, whether in Europe, the United States, Africa, anywhere in the world, a larger portion of their time, attention is on the phone or a screen. And I know that you have worked in thinking about how to use these new technologies to engage people rather than isolate them. What strategies have worked for you when it comes to engaging people online? But how does that also then translate into action in the real world? Because we have an expression in the United States, hashtag activism, where somebody just tweets like, or has a sarcastic comment about something, and then kind of feels like, well, there was my political activism for the day. But it never actually translates into voting, mobilization, initiatives that bring about change. What's your sense?
Well, I would rather answer with an example. In our world, we always say that email is dead. It's difficult to reach people by email. And it's a very good solution because unlike social media, the email is targeted. You have an email address, you send an email, the person receives the email. With social media, it's much more complicated than that. And with these new networks that arise, it's hard for us to even find ways in which we can actually tap in with our messaging. But the example I'm going to give you is with a petition that was started on our website by the students in Romania. They asked for a modernization of the way in which they are evaluated. They go through the same evaluation that I went through when I went to high school, or my sister that is 10 years older than me. And it wasn't changed. And what they did is they signed a petition on our website, 400,000 of them. Almost every kid in school in Romania signed that petition. And we require an email when people sign that petition. And so they created that email in order to sign that petition. And we want to work with them together for the next steps. What happened with that petition, the first time that it was submitted to the Minister of Education, he kind of mocked them. But then they came up with follow-up tactics. And the last declaration of the minister is somewhat, I'm going to think about it, but it's already, I see them win that campaign. Even if it's going to take a little bit more time, the way in which they work together, the way in which they are creative to put pressure on decision makers, makes me have much more hope than I have in my generation, for instance. And I would not treat these kind of things as individual, things that are too individualistic. We have to work together. The students in Romania, they somehow managed to find ways in which they talked. They used the platform that last time I heard of it, it was for online gaming, people synchronizing on strategies, and they used that software. It was impressive for me to see how well they can be organized and how efficient they are. And that is the one thing that brings me a lot of hope.
So, Federica works very local. And you, on the other hand, are part of a European-wide network advocating on behalf of the Roma people. What do you see, what are the trends that you're seeing in terms of young people getting involved Europe-wide? And how do they feel about European democracy? Because one of the interesting things about democracy in Europe, I remember when I was president coming here, you had local governments, you had regional governments, you had national governments, and then you had Brussels, you've got the EU, you've got the European Parliament, and so you know, there are a bunch of different ways to access politics, but I'm wondering, does that make it more difficult or more accessible for people to want to get involved and to feel like they have a hand in who's making decisions that affect their lives?
I'm going to start with the following. The democracy has always meant the same. It has meant the voice of the people, the power of the people, the decision of the people. And what I see in my generation and their perception and feeling of democracy has two aspects. The first one is that the Roma community in their mid-20s or even younger, they are very disappointed in democracy in general. Also in the approach of how some political leaders are responding to democracy and democratic ideals. And this has different reasons, because for so long, the Roma, in general, were excluded economically, politically, culturally, and were underrepresented. They didn't have their own representative who is coming directly from the community, who knows the issues in the community and the challenges, and who can deliver and articulate and tries to solve them. Because representatives who are non-Roma, they cannot know what is happening in the Roma community better than a Roma. So on the other hand, working for 10 years now in the community, building power in the community and showing different approach, like relationship buildings and so on, the community and the young people see a different added value. They can participate in public dialogues with politicians, with different political actors, with mayors and so on. And they see that this is an element that gives them, that gives them a value where they can contribute. So what is the narrative now in the community and amongst the youngsters? What I hear is, well, maybe we are, because we are the biggest ethnic minority in Europe with over 12 million Roma, maybe we are a key contributor to preserve democracy. And with all the painful history and survivals that we had in the past, now we are still here, and we are courageous and brave to take action. And that's what democracy is about bravery and effort that will bring bigger changes.
Excellent. All those people clapping up there, many of them are working on different issues. The three of you are working on different issues. How do you think, one of the challenges for democracy in the United States is sometimes people become very narrow in the issues that they're concerned about. You know, climate change that's a very complicated issue. Criminal justice reform is very detailed, and so organizations, activists, even elected officials sometimes work narrowly. But in order to build power and to actually move the levers of democracy, it's a huge advantage if you can form coalitions across groups. And I'm wondering, how have you been thinking about, in your own work or in conversations that you've been having, the need to work across sectors? Or, how do you think about the relationship between working in nonprofits versus running for office? Always a difficult debate, I think. Does change come more from the inside or from the outside beating down the door? How have you been thinking about that?
We're just laughing because we were having this discussion literally 15 minutes ago.
Were you encouraging Tudor to run for something?
To run for office, yes.
He's a very handsome guy. I think he could do well.
I'm trying really hard, but it doesn't like he wants to be convinced. What I believe is that we need way more cross-sectional politics in general, but way more engagement in different sectors. Yet, there are tons of challenges. First of all, generally, as we were saying, activists do not want to run for office. And this is what I'm trying to change from the very bottom, because I believe that we have generally attached a very negative meaning to politics, while politics is the air we breathe. Politics is in every single thing we do. It's in the transportations that we take, it's in the climate, it's in the way we engage with people, it's in the way we speak, how we are educated. Politics is everything. So whenever someone tells me, oh, politics is bad, politics is corrupted, politics is full of scandals, I reply, this is what governs your life. So if this is what governs your life, do you really want to be governed by the worst people that you think are getting there? And we are electing them in democracies. So what I don't understand, and what we were discussing about, is that we talk a lot about democracy, but then, especially in countries like mine, in places like mine, we have the lowest standards for the people that then get up in the parliament and write these laws for us. So I think that if we really want to change things, we need more people that have super high moral standards and that want to change things from the grassroots to the top level to get engaged into politics and get elected. Because it's true that you can get an amazing amount of change as an activist. I was an activist before becoming a politician. I was a community organizer. And I think I still want to be an activist. I want to be an activist. I want to get out and rally for climate change, or I want to get out with my people and clean parks if we need to. But we cannot avoid thinking that politics is not part of the game. Politics is part of the game. Politics will always be part of the game. And if we don't think that we don't have to get engaged, then we will keep being governed by the people that we don't like, even though we vote for them. And then we have voters' apathy, and we have kids not going to vote, and we have people getting way and way far away from politics while this still governs our life. This has to change, and I am arguing that this needs to change from the very bottom, where people like me, politicians, can start talking face-to-face with their constituency and regaining the trust that they've lost so far because they have been governed by the wrong people, because the right one were just too scared of the bad environment that politics brings up on.
convinced me, but no. I have my reasons still.
Well, I'm not going to put you on the spot today and ask you to announce your candidacy, this goes to the issues of this summit. You know, it's often easy to defend democracy in the abstract, but if you have been an activist and you've been working from the outside, sometimes it is difficult to see why change is moving slowly on the inside. And as I said in my remarks, some of that is by design. You know, as somebody who started locally and then ended up running a pretty big government, you know, a lot of the activists who worked with me would get frustrated and think somehow that, well, how come he hasn't gotten this done or that done yet? It must be because he no longer cares about us. You know, he's talking to all these, you know, rich contributors and this and that. When in fact, no, I still want exactly what you wanted, but the wheels of government are just moving very slowly because there are all these systems that are set up to block it. The reason I say that is because I think for democracy to work, you have to have both. You have to have people who are in the engine room and the deck of the ship of democracy, working to make it move in the right direction. But you also have to have people on the outside who are constantly maintaining pressure and getting people involved, because that's the engine, you know, that's the fuel that ultimately is going to get you to where you want to go. Yeah, so I'm interested in how, as I said, Tudor, you don't have to announce your candidacy,
Not yet.
but because there's an important role to play in citizen participation, activism, organization, and so far that's the role you've chosen to play. Do you feel like you can make enough of a difference in that kind, taking that approach? Particularly if maybe sometimes you said like the education minister seemed like he's not listening to 400,000 students. Do you think, you know what, we should have somebody in there who does listen?
It's a big temptation for many activists to go into politics, and I admire those who do. It's not a matter of me thinking that politics is dirty and we should not touch it. No, politics is where decisions are made. My fear is that if people like me enter politics, we leave an empty spot in the civil society. And that spot in a country like Romania was difficult to fill in the first place. We are a young democracy. If all of us from the civil society turn into politics, we need to bring new people to form this new civil society. And what I noticed in my line of work is that politicians become better when we demand them to do so. So I think that in a way the civil society is like that bad medicine that tastes bad, but you still need to take it because it makes you healthy. And I like to be that medicine that tastes bad. It makes me feel better. But if I would get $1 single each time I'm invited to join politics, I would solve the funding for my organization for 10 years.
Let me start with you on this question, Selva. We talked about online organizing, but one of the things that I do think has changed even since I was in office was the amount of misinformation, the difficulty of sorting between what's true and what's false, what's journalism and what's, you know, fabrication. And I'm wondering how all of you in the work that you try to do have dealt with the misinformation problem, whether it affects your work and whether you've come up with some solutions so that you can get facts and information out to people and you don't have to spend all your time refuting things that people think that aren't true. And in some cases, politicize issues that shouldn't be political. In the United States, as I think many of you saw, COVID became somehow a political issue, getting vaccinated or wearing masks. A lot of that was driven just by misinformation that was out there. And that seems to be happening on more and more issues. I'm wondering how it's affected you and whether you've seen some solutions to help young people distinguish between what's true and false in making decisions about how to participate and what to support.
Yes, definitely. The digital space has fundamentally alerted on how people are being exposed to engage with information. And I think that the internet has enabled a lot of people to create and expand different kind of content by a large audience at marginal costs, and it's instantly and freely accessible. However, there are big concerns also in our movement about how false information and misinformation is spreading on the internet to influence decisions by some political actors or political sides. So using the social media, you can create and you can expand different kind of misinformation. And as you said, the challenge is that those kind of fake news and misinformation are making the people to have different kind of opinion, which is not necessarily relevant or truthful. And this is an issue we have also with the Roma community, a community who has been discriminated for so long, ignored. It's very easy. There is a big base to spread fake news and to make them think like that. And not necessarily they can now differentiate what is opinion and what is fact. So what we do as activists, as movements, and I mean what we can do is we cannot, we don't have the space and tools how to regulate the internet. But what we can do is to try to counteract this kind of false news and to try to actively produce content that is relevant and spread the frequency of our own message and our own narrative.
Excellent. Federica, as elected official and activist, is that a problem that you've seen in terms of the work that you're doing? Do you find you make a proposal and somebody says, well, you know, I just saw on the internet that, you know, what you're doing is going to cause cancer, or it's going to, you know, destroy the economy or something, and then you have to spend a lot of time unwinding.
It exactly works like this. A really simple example: the cost of energy and the cost of water rose because of the war. Yet we had a couple of newspapers saying that that we were getting paid by the taxpayer money of this increase in water and energy. So obviously it's false, and obviously it should be even easy to think about it because it's the war, it's like something way above us. Yet what comes out there, and what I notice is that it's even easier for people to get up this false news and this false noise. It's scary. So, and it's not just about that, it's about rumors that get out, it's about people talking to people. So in a very small town, you have a huge amount of rumors coming out. And our question was like, how do we counteract against it? What do we do? So, of course, you can work online, but in such a small town, and again, Italy is full, and I guess also Europe, it's full of such small places, you can have a real confrontation with your constituencies. So we've started having town halls, on like open-air town halls now that it's summer and COVID is not such a big risk, especially outside. And we've asked people to join us in sharing with us their fears, their questions, what do they want, how can we answer to their problems. And first time, nobody asked questions. It was really weird. But then...
Everybody just sat there for half an hour?
Yeah, exactly. So we started talking about our policies.
Ah.
But then on our policies, they started asking questions. And many of them were really good questions. We see a lot of anger on Facebook, a lot of anger on social media. And when you go on real life, first of all, this anger is not that bad. But second, it has a motive. It has a reason. And when you meet your people and you can ask them, you can listen to them, you actually know what those reasons are, and you can give them answers. And not only I think we should give them answers, I think we should include them in the decision-making process and the implementations of the policies that we bring about. So to counteract this fake news environment in this small town, I guess that the real solution is coming back on the ground, grassroots, meeting with people, answering their questions, involving them, and making them part of the change that we want to see around.
Excellent. So, we're coming to the end of our session here, and I want to give you a two-part question. If you ever decide to run for office, this is how reporters get around. They're only supposed to get one question. They say, "Sir, I have a 5-part question," and then they'll tick them off. So I'm going to use the trick they taught me. And you can answer both, either one, or just don't answer, which is also a strategy that I taught them, and talk about what I want to talk about. I opened with my remarks, and obviously an enormous amount of time has been spent at this summit talking about the tragedy of what's happening in Ukraine. And I'm wondering how you think this has affected you, your generation, to witness this kind of crisis in the heart of Europe in a way that harkens back to your grandparents' generation. It's been a long time since we saw that much violence, and now we can witness it in real time, and displacement. So I'm curious, how's it impacted you and your friends? How do you talk about it? And does it encourage you to see the response and make you more committed to the public work that you're doing? So that's one question. Part two, because we're running out of time, is what are the things that do inspire you and keep you going? Because as I think, whether it's you, Frederica, or Tudor, but I know you all feel it, sometimes the work gets lonely. And sometimes democracy is discouraging. What is it that has kept that optimism and hope going, even when you confront setbacks and where you feel like democracy is not working? So why don't we start down with you?
Well, I think that the recent context and situation has affected generally the youth, and in particular the Roma community, in many aspects and many ways, psychologically, financially, and there is a lot of frustration. And as a matter of fact, in Ukraine, there are a lot of Roma. There is a big Roma community who has also been put aside and discriminated for so long. But yet again, the Roma who are there are fighting for Ukraine, and they are fighting for freedom. So I hope the war ends as soon as possible, and I hope that after the war, Roma won't be forgotten. What really inspires me, because for so long, the narrative towards us was negative. Much of stigma, negative perception, and big part of the Roma community accepted that. But going in the community, talking to people, working with people, and seeing how much of a big potential the Roma are and how much of a big capacity we have is what really inspires me and drives me. And this is something that I felt from the very beginning of my activism 10 years ago, and I still feel it whenever I go to the community. And I think that this is the new generation of a driving change, and a community who can preserve democracy and who can be part of preserving democracy in the next period. And I really hope that European stakeholders, institutions, will have more openness towards Roma and more inclusiveness in particular.
When you asked me about how do I see democracy now, it made me realize that in my family, I'm the first generation that lived the young years in peace and democracy. My parents, they lived theirs in the Cold War. My grandparents fought in World War II. My great-grandparents fought in World War I. And so I am the first one, basically, that lived to see democracy. Now, I'm not that young. I have gray hair. I still can hide it underneath the other parts. I still remember the days in Romania when we were a dictatorship. I was very young, but there are things that still are very strong memories. The queues to go and buy food, the heaters that were cold in the winter. I do not want to go back to that. And for many years I thought that, for instance, war is something that is unthinkable. And after 2014, it became obvious that war is again a thing in Europe. And it scares me. That's the hard reality. But that's what, when we get paralyzed with fear, that's when they win. No, fear is not really an option for us, because I do not want to go back to the days when Romania was a dictatorship. I do not want to see those atrocities happen again. So I will fight with everything I have to keep the democracy going and make sure that this system, as imperfect as it is, keeps on going, because it is the only thing that allows me to be in places like this, to meet the amazing leaders that I met in the last few days. And meeting you is something that would have been unthinkable for my parents' generation. So we have to defend this, because what would come next is unimaginable.
Madam Mayor, you get the last word here.
When it comes to Ukraine, I still remember the day of the war, and I remember calling my friends, and we were all shocked. And it was something that lasted for a while. Like, we had the crunch in the stomach. We couldn't think about what was happening. We couldn't think about the fact that that our borders, like Ukraine, which we consider Europe, were at war, and we're for a really big European generation. So we felt extremely attacked, sad, lost somehow. But on the other hand, it was also sort of a wake-up call, a reminder that in Italy, at least in my town, in my region, we are still lucky enough to be able to keep working on a democracy that it's not working as we would like it to be. It's not being as we would like it to be. So that brings me to the point of what is it that passionates me and moves me, especially when you live in a town where in front of you, you don't have just your political opponent, but probably the woman who stole your boyfriend when you were 15 years old and you still haven't forgotten. So it gets...
That's a good point. That's like, if it's, that makes it a little more personal.
Exactly.
No, I wasn't pointing. She's not here. I was pretending that I was pointing.
But it gets harder because you want to do stuff and you know that you can't move on because probably there is something personal behind it. So how do you do? And this is also what gave me hope. I'll tell you like a short story. I have been working with this woman, not working, I would have loved to work with this woman, but since I got elected, she's been opposing every single thing that I tried to propose. From the football court for the kids, from a youth center, with no reason. I could understand why. So one day, I went into the local high school to talk to the youth of the local high school, and I was talking to them about the fact that my mom wanted me to become a lawyer, my dad wanted me to become a consultant. I tried both, I hated them both, and then I got into politics, which was my dream. And I told these kids that we live in a society that doesn't give us the space to understand who we are, what we love and what we want to do. So it's their job and our job as politicians to support them in finding the space and allowing them to become what they want. Great speech, went back home, slept on it. Morning after, I received a call. It was this woman, and she said, look, my daughter was in the stage and was listening to you, and she filmed you, and she sent me the recording. And I wanted to thank you because my story is your story, with the difference that I didn't have the courage that you had to follow my own dreams. And having you out there talking to my daughter about the fact that you did, gave my daughter the confidence to come to me and say that she wanted to become an architect. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to work with you on this youth center.
That's great.
Knowing that beyond being politicians, we are human beings that share stories, and at the end of the day, we all want this world to be a better place, is what gives me hope, because I see every single day that we can overcome our differences, we can build bridges, we can close the gap between the politicians, the high school girls that had a fight over a boyfriend, and we can unite on what really matters for us, and this gives me a lot of hope.
Good. Well, you, the three of you give me hope. The young people who are working with us at the foundation are giving us hope. For those of you who are already parts of organizations working on democratic issues, either here or on other continents, I cannot tell you enough that we have to invest in this cohort if we are going to succeed. Because every time I have a chance to have conversations, the kind of idealism and innovation and imagination and courage that you've heard from these three, they're out there. And they need to be heard and need to be empowered because they're going to be the ones who take us where we need to go. All right? Please give them a big round of applause. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to thank you another time? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.